between the house roof and the conservatory roof, there's a box section gutter. The joint on the box section gutter began to leak. The roofers came out and fixed the leak, and this is what the customer was left with. The elderly gentleman had paid in full and was told that a plasterer would soon arrive. A few months passed and he had no joy, so eventually he phoned me.
Need to lose about 2 stones, this fits nice.
The first thing I'm going to do is check the widest points of the opening. I'm going to make a plasterboard slightly bigger and then make the opening to fit around the plasterboard. I've already noticed that the plasterboard thickness is 12.5mm, and that's good because I've got 12.5mm on the van. I'm going to hold the plasterboard in place and mark around it with a pencil. Another thing that's important to do is make sure you mark which way the board goes in. Although you've done your best to cut it square, this way it'll fit snug as a bug in a rug, and if it's the wrong way round it just won't fit in. There's my little mark going on now, on the plasterboard and on the ceiling, so I know which way round it goes. Now to cut the board you can use a Stanley knife or a pad saw. If you've got a multi-tool it's a lot faster. Now one of the main advantages with using a multi-tool is it cuts with the vibration. Now that's important because anything that moves slightly will vibrate with the tool. So any loose cables above the ceiling, it'll be very difficult to cut through them. But if you were to use a Stanley knife or a pad saw, you'd cut through them quite easily and you'd soon know about it. We just checked and removed the remainder of the old screws that were left in place.
Have you got some metal screws there, have you?
Yeah.
This is an MF ceiling, which means metal frame or metal fabricated. Now, you need a special type of drywall screw for that, a self-tapping drywall screw. You can use standard drywall screws, but they're a little bit more difficult to push into the metal. Now, I'm going to have to hold the plasterboard in place with one hand and the screw gun in the other hand, so it's going to be difficult to go in my tool belt to pick screws out. So I'm keeping them in my mouth so they're ready. Let's try the board in for size, see if it fits. Look at that, it looks like it grew there. Now I know where the metal frame is, so I could just screw it straight up, but because I'm showing Leighton what to do, it's good practice just to mark off the studs at each end so you know where they are. When you're screwing plasterboards up on a ceiling, the screws should be every 230mm or 9 inches if you're talking in old money. If you spread your hand out on the plasterboard, it's roughly the distance between your little finger, the tip of your little finger, and the tip of your thumb. Now it's time to apply the sealer. This is to help the plaster stick to the old plaster. You can't really use a grit when you're blending in, so something like blue grit or thistle bondit won't work because you need to feather into nothing and the grit will cause little bumps. Now most people use PVA, polyvinyl acetate. That's the stuff the kids use in school. I've chose to use SBR, which is styrene butadiene rubber. The reason I use this is because it dries a lot quicker and seals a lot better than PVA, and it doesn't flash, so when the decorators come along to paint over it, it doesn't cause them any problems.
The longest part of this job is going to be letting that SBR dry in. You want it to dry because if you go over it when it's wet, it can start to tear a little bit into the plaster. I want it to sort of, it's okay if you're skimming the whole area, when you're blending in, you want it to really soak in a little bit to the plaster, give it enough time, because what can happen is, as you're trying to blend in, you're sort of scraping it with the trowel, and it can tear that. It forms like a skin before it dries, and you'll rip the skin.
So, whilst we let that dry, we had a cup of tea with the customer, and then, once that was ready, we put the scrims on. Scrims will not stick to wet SBR. Now, the scrim I'm actually using is called Easy Scrim. It's made by Easy Mix, the same company that make Half Time. It's extra wide, it's got extra glue on it, it's extra strong, and it's yellow, which makes it easy to see. Unless you're colourblind, then you can't see the colour yellow. Because I'm going to blend in, I want to keep the overall thickness to a minimum, so I'm not overlapping the scrims at the bits where they intersect with each other, only because it just adds like an extra millimetre that I've then got to build up in plaster and then feather out to nothing. So I'm just doing everything I can to try and keep this as flush as possible. As soon as this scrim is on, we're going to mix up some plaster. We're also going to use half time in the plaster, which is an accelerator, because with a tiny little patch like this, we don't want to be sitting around forever waiting for it to set. Okay, so you're supposed to use a full sachet of this to half a bag, and that makes it half time. But I'm going to use about half a sachet to about a mug full of water. It's going to be a super concentrated mix that will not take long at all to set. When you're doing tiny little mixes of plaster, it's not worth getting an electric whisk out. Most fellas will mix this by hand. Most guys will use a bucket trowel. But you'll find that a scratcher is much faster. Okay, so there's a few things that I've got on my mind at the moment. I'm trying not to drop any plaster. I'm trying to make sure that no scrims lift up and pull away when I'm plastering. I'm trying to make sure that I cover the scrims sufficiently so that they don't show through. I'm trying to make sure that I blend all the edges into the SBR because I don't want there to be a ridge. And I'm also aware that the plaster is setting extremely fast because it's got an accelerator in it. Oh, and just to make things a little bit more exciting, for the first and second coat, I'm going to be using my new trowel. I'm trying to break this trowel in, and it's worth just noting that it's very difficult to do a lovely job with a brand new trowel. An old trowel finishes the work much nicer. So I'm going to use this for laying on, and I'm going to switch to my old trowel to finish the job off. Oh, and for any plastering nerds that are interested, the trowel that I'm using is a 14-inch by 4-inch carbon steel Marshalltown trowel. This is the only size trowel that I like to use. Okay, so for little patches like this, let's talk about accelerating the plaster, because using half time isn't the only way. Okay, there's a few different methods that you can use. You can mix plaster with hot water. That will set it off a lot quicker. You can mix plaster with dirty water. Some plasterers will keep dirty water on the van for little jobs like this. You can put cement in the mix. You can use out-of-date plaster. I mean, I don't even want to say this, but trust me, some fellas are out there doing this. You can actually pee in the mixing water, and the urine will set the plaster off faster. Now, all these methods do work, but for me, they're unpredictable. Sometimes work really fast, and sometimes, you know, it hardly makes any effect whatsoever. So for me, using half-time plaster accelerator, I know exactly where to stand with it. Now, I've increased the ratio that you're recommended to use here. It's quite fine. It doesn't weaken the plaster in any way. It just means that I haven't got time to rest in between troweling up. I haven't got to work really fast. I just haven't got loads of time to sit around and wait. You'll notice as well with blending in that water is essential. I'll keep brushing around the edges where I'm blending in. If you don't keep lubricating that, because the plaster's on so thin where it feathers into nothing, it'll just dry out, and once it dries out, it tears. A little bit out of the camera shot, I'm also patching around a spotlight for the gentleman. I just noticed it wasn't finished that nice. It looked like someone had cut a spotlight in the wrong place and then tried to fill it with some filler instead. I'll show you something now. I'll show you how I finish my internal angles. A lot of guys use a corner trowel, which is fine, but it just means you've got to put your tools down, go and find it, you know, come back and use it. So instead, the way I like to do it is I just use the corner of my trowel. See, like that. In fact, let me show you again properly. Look, this is what I mean. See, I just use the toe of the trowel, and that's the corner. Done. Now, if you look closely, you'll be able to see that the plaster's going dark in sections now. It's starting to set. The accelerator's really taking hold. The old boy been in a few times, offering us a drink in between this. Would you like another cup of tea? Trying to tell him, look, I haven't really got time to fart at the minute, mate, because this will be set in literally 3 minutes. It'll be finished. So this is it now. We're basically nearly done. Now, one thing I always like to do is all the water that comes off the fat of the plaster, you can see it's like a mess around the outside of the patch. So before I'm finished, I will go round that with a microfiber cloth and just clean all that up quite neat. But before we get round to doing that, we need to make sure that angle looks nice and smart. So we'll just finish that with an angle brush. Basically just a little 1.5 inch paintbrush. A Purdy brush is probably your best bet. Lovely bristles on them. That just finishes the angle nice. You don't want to do it when the plaster's too wet though, because it'll leave brush marks in the plaster. That's not what you want. So now the customer came in and asked me how much he owed me for this little patching job. And I thought to myself, seeing as how he'd already paid a roofer once and the plasterer never came back, he basically lost his money. I thought the good thing to do to restore his faith in tradesmen was to just do it for free for him, as I wasn't here more than an hour and a half. But he was adamant he wanted to pay. He was saying to me, it's not about the money, he can afford it. The money wasn't the issue, it was the principle of the matter, and he just felt let down. But he did say that my kind offer had restored his faith in humanity a little bit, so all good I suppose in the end, and I got paid. In fact, he gave me a little tip, which was quite nice. And basically there's the finished product. Nice and feathered in, no joint line, and polished up lovely. I'm Kurt Johnstone, and you've been watching On The Trowel.
I'm on the trowel.
We're on the trowel.
Right guys, I'm Kurt Johnstone, you're watching On The Trowel.
On the trowel.
Alright, Kirky, today I've been on the trowel.
I'm on the trowel.